Hello and welcome to episode 15 of the Note to File podcast, a collection of interviews, best practices, and candid commentary for clinical research sites. Our guest today is Mario Sierra. Mario has a background in biochemistry and business. He's currently a lead study coordinator at Research Source in Austin, Texas, as well as business strategist for Paramount Research Network. In this episode, we talk a little bit about investigator adoption of eSource, the benefit of clinical research fast track, and the slow adoption of tech across the clinical research industry. Without further ado, Mario Sierra. All right, Mario, thanks so much for coming on. I appreciate it, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Brad.
Absolutely. So, as I so often start with pretty much everybody who comes on, tell me a little bit about how you got into research. I know that you're, I'd call you a baby. You're pretty new in clinical research. It's been, maybe a year or so officially? Is that right?
So, yeah, it's been a year in July. Yes.
Nice. So yeah, tell me how you got into it.
Sure. So I've definitely heard that question in some of your previous episodes, and I'd say I'm a little bit different because I actually sought out research as opposed to falling into it. So just a little bit of my educational background. I went to UT Austin and I majored in biochemistry and minored in business. And post-graduation, I was looking for something that merges business and science with a lot of research, and just looking around at different job titles and all that, clinical research stood out. It stood out because it's exactly that. It's a merge of business and science. We're working on the cutting edge of science, like investigating new drugs, new medical devices. And there's also the business end of it, where you're running an organization that runs trials in conjunction with doctors and different research facilities. So it ended up being a very good marriage.
Yeah, and actually, I kind of love the way that you came into it, because it's very different, at least so far, and everyone else we've had on, that you didn't start out at a university or a hospital. It wasn't sort of an accident that you fell into. Looking through your background, it looks like you went through the clinical research fast track program?
Yes, fast track was very important.
Yeah, and actually, I'm kind of curious. I've talked to other people who have either they teach, or do instruction in it, or have also gone through it. So I guess tell me a little bit about how that helped you, especially since you set out specifically to learn clinical research. So it looked like that was your kind of first stop along the way.
Yeah. So I saw that you had Jeannie Farnsworth on there, and she was actually one of the instructors, or she was leading the cohort that I had. This was last July in Dallas. And one thing I really liked about Fast Track is that they set you up. I mean, it's a crash course on research. So you go in knowing nothing about clinical research, and you come out knowing all the vernaculars, all the ICF and IRBs and DOAs, all these acronyms that we use in research. You come out already having a great foundation and knowing what the lingo is. So that way you can jump into the research side, and whether you're at the site, at an academic site, or even people get placed into CROs, and they do very well because they already have a knowledge base of research. And so it ended up helping me a lot to just hit the ground running and start enrolling trials, and already just so much knowledge it equipped me with.
Yeah, that is that's awesome, and that's oftentimes a barrier in the beginning. All the ridiculous acronyms that we deal with in our industry. So yeah, having to not be like, okay, what's an AE, what's an SAE, what's an IRB. So yeah, that's that alone, just having the exposure to all the jargon and all the different parts that go along.
For sure.
Obviously, it's a pattern I'm seeing specifically with clinical research fast track. So I might have to look into that myself for new employees. I'm glad to hear it was a positive experience.
Absolutely.
I also, I really very much like the idea that you recognized early on that, clinical research does have, there's a business side to it, which I think is oftentimes kind of underappreciated, especially when you come from a large, if you're in an academic center, you're part of a department, and you're a coordinator, you probably don't care that much about how much money clinical research is bringing in. But, someone like yourself, if you're entrepreneurial and are interested in science, then I think it's a perfect combination of those two things. Okay, so tell me a little bit about how that kind of brings you to what you're doing now.
Sure. So right now I'm working at 2 sites. So these are different research organizations. One is Paramount Research Network in San Antonio. The other is Research Source in Austin. So they're 2 SMOs, site management organizations, and we're embedded in one clinic at each site. We're trying to bring in more trials to make a full repertoire of research. And after that, the goal is to go branch out into new clinics and bring them trials. And these can be across different therapeutic areas. But right now, we're focused on spinal medical devices in Austin. And then in San Antonio, we're doing a NASH trial. And we're also branching out into some medical device there as well.
Nice. Yeah. And I always recommend as much as possible, if you can diversify, the more you diversify your therapeutic areas, kind of the better off you are. We know that GI is super hot right now, but who knows, 2 years from now, that may not be the case. You might be stuck with, a PI that you can't get much done with. So yeah, that's awesome. What have you learned much as far as, are the two places do things differently? And have you been able to sort of pick up some learning from that? I know that everywhere I've worked seems to operate almost entirely differently. So do you think you've gotten some perspective from dealing with two different SMOs versus, kind of starting out with just the one?
Actually, there's a lot of similarities that I see between both SMOs. Like, they're both using eSource. We're on Creo at both sites. So I was able to take my experience and just plop it into the next site and get rolling with that. There's a little bit of difference in the process, I guess, like with onboarding new trials. And I think that would probably be the biggest difference in the two leaders that I have, just their process of finding new docs and finding new trials.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. I think you're getting, some very diverse experience, like in the sort of still the beginning of your career, really. So that's going to benefit you a lot in the long run. I know that, even for me and people I've talked to, a lot of people sort of, either wither in, again, these large institutions where, you kind of do everything the same way forever and ever. So I think it's really cool. And I'm actually really encouraged to see, sort of a new era of clinical research people come up like this, because I think that's, again, you're going to get, I think, the best experience doing things like this in sort of a smaller, faster paced environment where you're oftentimes more encouraged to have to react and respond. And the fact that you guys are using eSource, early on is huge. That's still obviously not the norm, I would say, across clinical research. I'm curious to know, were you there as that was initiated, or is that something you came in that was already in place?
So it was a process of finding different CTMS softwares to use at the site. We were looking at a couple different ones, and Creo ended up being the best option. So I was part of the process of deciding which CTMS to use. And on that point too, yeah, when I was coming into this industry, it surprised me so much that a lot of the industry runs on paper source still. I mean, those triplicate forms are maybe 5 years in the past. We're just now getting into eSource. And that actually fires me up a lot about getting into this industry, because that tells me that there's going to be a lot of opportunity for different software plays and different businesses to arise in this arena. It's similar to like the internet boom, basically. Like, we're probably 20 years in the past in this industry from what's happened around us,
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And it's ridiculously frustrating and, a little bit just sad that what you imagine to be, out on the cutting edge in research is so far behind. I mean,
yeah.
I can promise you there are still a ton of sites out there, probably even listening, that use Excel spreadsheets to keep up with, their visits. That's fine. That's not necessarily their fault, but just the fact that we haven't gotten there yet, it's both discouraging, but at the same time, it's going to be, I think, a lot of opportunity for people to, be able to do a lot of different things and a lot of different positions that will help integrate that. I'm kind of curious to know how that has worked for you guys on both like a investigator adoption as well as sponsor adoption. Do you guys see any pushback or issue from your sponsors as you're dealing with, or that basically saying, hey, we use eSource?
So yeah, that's a great question. So I guess to transition into eSource, a lot of our doctors, they use EMRs. So those are electronic medical record. They're kind of used to using an online platform for, I guess, tracking their patients. But in the research perspective, we've kind of bridged it using some paper source and some eSource to make it more friendly for the doctors. So there are some paper forms that they'll be signing, and then a lot of the data that we capture, basically it's the coordinators that are using Creo, and then our doctor is filling out a lot of paper forms and signing them there, and then we upload them to Creo to show PI oversight and show that they are aware of what's going on with their patients in the trial.
Nice. So yeah, I get a little bit of still a hybrid system at that point.
Exactly. And the sponsors, so during this COVID crisis, it actually benefited us to be on Creo because they were able to do remote monitoring. And that's something that a lot of sites have struggled with during this time, trying to figure out how to find monitors or how to allow monitors to come into their site with these COVID precautions that are going on.
Yeah, and that's a good point. For better or worse, that's really driving some change and innovation in the industry because, frankly, a lot of people won't come on site. which is a good thing. But if you're able to provide, the ability for CRAs to monitor your data, remotely, that creates a lot of advantages really for everyone. Again, you don't have somebody on site you have to, essentially sit with, keep an eye on all day. It saves the sponsor money. They're not having to send their CRAs out to travel. And really, the data is available to anyone who's got access to the system. So, you can even have a different data entry person on your team who can access it on top of just the CRA monitoring. So it provides a lot of efficiencies for sure.
Absolutely.
So what does your day-to-day look like then as you're sort of splitting your time between two sites?
So let's see. During this time, the sites have been on a freeze for enrolling patients, but we've been able to do more startup activities. So there's been onboarding 2 new trials at our Austin site and 1 new trial in our San Antonio site. So that's been a lot of where my focus is. There's a lot that goes into startup. And so it's not been so much seeing patients and enrolling patients into the active trials, but trying to get new trials into the sites that we have.
Yeah, now is definitely a good time to, if you're not, really working your business development pipeline. In addition to that, you should be, looking at your SOPs, looking at your processes. There's a lot of things that can be done to help you as you reopen. If you're not, if you had to close, we've been pretty lucky. We've mostly been able to stay pretty functional, but it provides a lot of opportunity to kind of hone your processes. Have you guys started to see, I guess you've seen a little bit of a ramp up here recently?
So yeah, Texas had a little opening. This was probably 3-4 weeks ago. And then now Texas is in a spike of coronavirus. So everything is kind of going back to shutdown mode. We were able to enroll 1 patient in one of our trials in that kind of in-between period. But yeah, we've gone back to a more remote model again, where we're not so much active at the site. And yes, like you said, we can definitely use this time to refine the process. Whenever you have a lot of patients coming through and you're trying to just follow them, it makes it harder to step back and look at the process as a whole. So that's what we've taken this time to do, capitalize on that.
Yeah, it's so often very sort of feast or famine. So, as you're enrolling a trial, that's taking up a lot of your time and resources. So occasionally it's kind of nice to have the extra time to really stand back and get a look at the bigger picture and kind of get your ducks in a row. So, I hope that's something that sites are really taking advantage of as much as possible.
Absolutely.
So in your, year or so here of doing this, what are some best practices that you've kind of picked up along the way?
It's a great question. Let's see, best practices. So I would say using software to leverage my work is one of the best practices that I've seen. So what I try to do at our sites is find softwares that allow me to offload some work. So for example, Creo is the prime example where we're able to use that to collect data online. But another platform that I like to use is called Slope. And this allows us to track inventory. So we upload all of our inventory. So when you start a new trial, say it's a drug trial, you get all these shipping boxes, all the kits to draw blood, and so many different moving parts. What we do is we upload that to the software, to Slope, and that allows us to monitor it remotely and not have to be at the site and do a physical inventory of what we have. So that's been a very good practice that we implemented before COVID started, and it's helped us manage things throughout this crisis too.
Yeah, and that's a good one. I actually just recently interviewed Ethan from Slope. By the time this comes out, I think his will release a week before yours. So yeah, we talked quite a bit about Slope, and I do really like what they've done. It's a pretty I thought it was a really interesting and smart thing to capitalize on and build a platform around for a site level, because it's something that you so often don't really think about. But I can't tell you how many times throughout my career, if I've gone to find a lab kit only to be like, oh, well, this expired a week ago.
Yes.
So that it really helps. Yeah. So that's a really cool tool. Creo, we use Creo as well. I really like Creo, and I'm kind of sad to say that we haven't utilized the eSource as much as I initially intended to. Just because when we started getting hammered with new study opportunities and you're starting out, it was tricky for us to kind of manage that process of building the source, making sure we're doing everything, really well and efficiently. But yeah, I do love that. I like to use HubSpot, to track all my study leads. Some kind of CRM, I think, is like smart for sites to use. I don't feel like I've seen a lot of sites who really utilize some kind of CRM to track it. But yeah, I think that there's a lot of software out there that's maybe not meant for specifically the clinical research industry, but can easily be leveraged to help us do our jobs better, and stuff besides Excel and Word.
Mhm. Yeah, one of the things that kind of drives me crazy about research is that we collect one piece of information and then we have to put that piece of information in 10 different places. And so that's exactly what software is good for. You collect your data and then this data is shareable to other softwares from my platform. And that's exactly what, Creo is getting there, and things like Slope are helping in that process.
Yeah, I'm really curious to see how sponsors, I've got to think it's got to be driven from the sponsors at some point to get some more consistency across, because you're right. It's crazy that, if we're using 3 different systems, if you're lucky, for every study, and none of those things seem to really communicate well to each other.
Definitely.
And then, every sponsor has a lot of their own proprietary stuff, which just creates more confusion and it just goes less efficiency. So it's insane.
Yes. And then in the year that I've been doing research, I've had probably 20 different logins now that I have to keep track of, different EDCs and different platforms that each sponsor is using. So yeah, it definitely gets very chaotic. And the more trials you have, the more logins and the more passwords and the more accounts you have.
Yeah, that's easily one of my most frustrating things about it. And if you don't use LastPass, that's my little piece of value I'll throw out there, that anyone listening might check out LastPass, that it'll help kind of carry your logins across any system that you use. So you have one login that stores all your passwords. But if you create a password on your computer, it will be available on your phone if you use it later. So I love that, because I would not be able to log into anything if I didn't have something tracking it for me.
Absolutely, yeah. And then these softwares, they make you reset your password every 14 days, it seems like too. Yeah. So there's that.
Yeah, exactly. They don't make it easy for anyone. So what are some other resources you use sort of in your day-to-day that you might share with the clinical research community?
So another resource I use is Asana. That's what I use to track, tasks that I have to accomplish during the day. And you can even go in and set it up so a certain visit, there are certain tasks that you have to complete in a visit. Or the way I've done it is put all those tasks in a project in Asana and then make sure that they're all met, check, and then they go away. And then that way I know that I've conducted the visit to protocol, and that eliminates some deviations and all that. So that's been a pretty good resource.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. We also use Asana. So a lot of our teams sort of decentralized. So we use Slack to communicate, and Slack has a nice integration with Asana. So if I'm, if I get a study lead, but I need to pass it off to somebody to follow up on, I can sort of work it all through Slack, but Asana will track the process of that, working that study lead. So yeah, I very much also endorse Asana. I use it more for the study startup process than anything, but yeah, that is another awesome. I'm glad to hear, again, people using these different tools and sort of making it work, for you. Again, none of that's specifically meant for clinical research per se, but you can sort of utilize it to your advantage for sure.
Yes, definitely. I definitely try and find any software solution that makes the process more streamlined and makes it so that we're keeping on track with everything for sure.
Yeah, no, I love that. All right. Well, very good. Well, anything else you want to add before we kind of wrap up here?
No, I think we covered some great topics, and it was a great interview. So thank you.
Yeah, very good. Where can people reach out to you online?
Yeah, I'm most active on LinkedIn. You can find me there. And then our website is, for our San Antonio site, theprnllc.com. You can check us out there.
All right. Very good, Mario. Thank you so much for coming on, man. I appreciate it.
Alrighty. Thanks, Brad.
As always, thank you for listening to the Note to File podcast. Please check us out at notetofilepodcast.com for full episode transcripts, show notes, and contact information for our guests. Thanks again.